Hey there everybody, Eric from Outer Limitless coming at you today with another video. Now in today's video I have my Ruger 1022 BX trigger group. I need to get this thing cleaned up. It's been through a few hundred rounds. At this point I've never taken apart a trigger group. I started life with my original factory trigger group. I haven't taken this apart either. And for me, basic mechanics when you're working on firearms, it can be daunting. You're a little bit nervous. It's like, can I get this thing apart? Can I put it back together? If I do, is it going to work? What are the steps? What are the things that you need to do to make it happen? Well, we're going to figure that out together today. So in today's video, what we're going to do, we're going to take apart this BX trigger group again for the Ruger 1022. Let's see if I can do this successfully. And if I am, this is going to be fully cleaned up, ready to go to the range. And at this point, hopefully it's something I can do from here on out into the future with confidence. But with that said, I have a whole bunch to do and a whole bunch to share with you. And if you're interested in seeing a little bit more about what I'm about to get into, do me a favor, stay tuned. So here with the receiver group removed from the stock, you can see these pins pretty much start to fall out almost on their own. These are pretty easy to get out of here. So you really just need to remove these two pins. And then your trigger assembly comes out. Now, keeping in mind, this is the BX trigger group. I do also have the factory trigger group here. But this here being the factory BX trigger group, you have your ejector here. Kind of pick this up and slide it back. You just need to make sure that this goes back into place. When you put this back together, you end up with some pins. So you got to kind of pay attention to the details here very carefully as to not lose track of what pins go where. So as you remove these pins, again, this one here on the top, punching that out, this is going to allow a spring. So on the inside here, this spring needs to get tucked back in there when you put it back together. And also the ejector. Now even furthermore, when you rock it this way, you can see that the pin is holding your bolt release lever in place. That bolt release lever, you can see, comes down and underneath. So that's right there. You can see when you push on that, that rocks that up. Now keep in mind, when this is in this position, this is under spring tension. So here, the hammer, I'm going to pull my trigger and keep my finger against it and release this nice and slow so it doesn't whack on anything or cause any sort of stress or damage. But again here, popping out this pin, I'm going to slide this out of the way. And here is the spring for that hammer. Now remember, this piece here needs to go down and underneath that pin that I removed. But as you swivel it, here's the other side of that spring. So that part of the spring, you'll see, when you put this back together, it nests down and inside and onto a little stay. Again, that's going to be hard for you to see, but it's right down in there. And there's a tiny little notch that the spring sits down and inside. So again, when you go to put this back together, it needs to be rocked forward, and that has to sit down and into place. Now that bolt release is being held in place at the bottom by this pin here, as well as your mag release. So this pin is doing sort of double duty, holding in both your bolt release and again, your mag release. So as you press this pin out, and for me, it looks like it might be happier coming out this direction. This is just a tiny bit snug, so as long as I'm careful, I'm just going to promote it easily with a pair of pliers. Depressing and sliding your mag release out, and at this point, you can see this can be removed, and it does have a spring, and your bolt release comes out. You kind of need to wiggle it out. As you see, it's got this little sort of tab coming off. And so now on the back side here, on the hammer, you do end up with this spring, and that pretty much sets into place right behind where this hole is. That can get pushed out with a punch. And you can see here that comes off. Now, on the back side, you end up with that little bit of like a C-clip there. And then the spring, this can all be cleaned up. We have just a couple of last pins. This one on the top. Releasing the hammer and the spring now, I'm going to be very careful to figure out the orientation of this spring. So as you see here, and popping that off, this spring goes so that the bent side angles in and onto the hammer, or just beside it, I should say, and the straight and flat part is on the bottom. So you don't want to have this like twisted and backwards when you go to put it together. Again, I'm going to reiterate, this goes on this side here with that bent and kinked part towards the top side of the hammer, and that will get it to where you need. Now the actual trigger itself, pulling out this bottom pin here, rocking the trigger out of the way and out the top. I'm not going to disassemble this. This can stay together just as it is. And then here you can see this is your actual safety, sliding back and forth. You end up with this little pin that sits down inside here, and there is a spring, so you need to be careful not to lose this. And that spring seems fairly well seated in there. It'll probably come out if I dig at it just a little bit with my fingernails. And in my opinion, with this stuff, better to remove it and know where it is than to have it fall out and lose it and you can't find it. And so down here, there you can see, that's that safety. Feels a little gritty to me, so getting that nice and clean, that's going to pay off. You can hear it. Sounds a little bit gritty. So just some foulings in there. I have maybe 500 rounds through this right now without the trigger group being cleaned. So this is going to be a nice opportunity to clean everything up, and then we'll put it back together. Now where this is polymer, you want to be careful. Make sure you use solvents and cleaners that are compatible with polymer. And I use Breakthrough Clean products. This is the military grade solvent, so I haven't had any issues with this yet on anything from what I can tell, and it's supposed to be polymer safe, so I'm going with it. I've been using this on all my firearms, and to date everything's been working out just well. So I'm going to take my time, clean everything up, and then we'll work on putting this back together. So now everything, what I'm going to call rough cleaned with the solvent, I'm now going to do the exact same cleaning with CLP. Now, I know CLP is supposed to be sort of a one-step solution, but for me, I really want to break up the foulings, get them nice and clean. So at this point, you can see all my parts nice and clean, leveraging the solvent, and now using the CLP. That's just going to get a little bit of lubricant and just a little bit of protection on here. Now, I'm going to caveat that by saying 22 LR is ridiculously dirty. So in that regard, I don't want to leave any heavy residue. I'm just putting enough in here to sort of like lubricate and get everything sort of protected with a very fine film. But at that, I'm going to wipe off absolutely as much as I possibly can. So again, this is more of like a fine tuning and really just a final stage just to get everything just lightly protected. So this is actually going to take me a little while just to go through and sort of detail clean everything, make sure I got all the little nooks and crannies, and just get a little bit of that CLP on here for some protection. Just for the example, after the solvent, you can see very dry looking, but now just a little bit of that CLP just rubbing off sort of the after effects in a way of that solvent, which is just a little bit harsh, but at the same time, it just doesn't leave any level of protection. And again, that's just kind of getting things a little polished up, a little fine-tuned. And again, I am going to rub off any excess by the time I'm done. All right, so now with everything fully cleaned and ready to go, again, I'll continue to touch this up as I reassemble, but we should be in pretty good shape. So the first thing I'm going to do is find my little spring and set it back inside here under the trigger guard with this little pin. Pointy side goes in, and setting that down and into place, that feels real good. Slipping my trigger down and around, and just kind of holding that pin into place until I get the trigger back around. Now at this point, I kind of need to line up my hole. This is the smallest pin of all the pins that I removed, and just kind of wiggling the trigger around, my pin goes in. That was fairly easy, and at this point, that looks good. I think the next thing I'm going to focus on is getting my hammer and spring back into place. Which again, remember, this goes with the angle towards the top of the hammer. Dropping this carefully down and into place, taking my pin and getting it started. And you're going to press down just a little bit against your trigger. And when you do that, you can get the pin to slide, and that slides into place. This spring here, you do need to rock it forward before you finish your assembly. So again, you can see here, you want this to go down, and it sits on a little stay down in the bottom. It's got a little V-notch. And then this part here goes under the pin we're going to install towards the end. Here's your hammer spring. We're going to put this, I don't even know if that's exactly what that's called, but that sets down in the hole in the back. And you'll notice this has a flat part. That's going to go in the vertical, so not horizontal, but vertical. And it slips right down and into the hammer there. So mechanically, that goes back, and you'll see it now locks. And when I pull the trigger, it comes forward. So mechanically, this does seem to be working just fine. And when I lock my lock, this should not fly forward. Yes. So mechanically, this has gone back together just fine. And it actually feels really good. So now I think the easiest thing to do is probably start to set some of these pieces back into place. So here on the sort of front end of the mag release there, getting that in with the spring. So just laying that in place there, that should work just fine. I'm just going to slip my mag release into place here. So just getting it close. So as you press this all the way in, you might need to wiggle it just a little bit. I find that this gets a little bit stuck. So I kind of got to spin it and twist it a little bit. But there, depressed all the way in. It's real easy to get that tab underneath where it needs to be. And you can kind of let it go. And at that point, everything's sort of held into place. Just be careful because that is under spring pressure. My bolt release, now again, sort of wiggling this down and sliding it down and into place. So just a little lesson, if you notice you don't keep this spring rocked back, your bolt release is going to be in the way. So before you install your bolt release, take this spring, spin it backwards towards the rear, and just leave it out of the way. Because your spring is ultimately going to sit in that V-notch. Remember, I was saying there's a V-notch down below. That is actually on your bolt release. You can see that V-notch there. That's where the spring sits. So again, get that bolt release back into place. And as I mentioned, for me, pretty simple. Once I see that's in proper alignment, just a little persuasion with my punch, and that goes in just fine. Now taking the spring and swinging that forward, landing the sort of bottom part now on that V-notch. That goes right and into place. That's easy. Grab your final pin, start to slide it in place, but before you do, get your bolt release up and into place and start to establish your pin through. Take your ejector, slide that on, and then you can just tuck this spring here right underneath that pin and push the pin into place. And at this point, this should be done. I think we're in good shape. Mechanically, this all looks sound. So at this point, I can put my trigger group back into my receiver and we'll do a final dry run. And so there you have it, a disassembly, cleaning, and reassembly of the BX trigger group for the Ruger 1022. Now, I do fully expect it's going to be pretty much exactly the same for the original standard trigger group. I don't see there being any reason why that would be a difference. For me, general mechanics is necessary for firearms. This was my first time getting into this, but I was slow and methodical, and I took my time, paid attention to the details. If you need to, take photographs of every step. In my case, I did it on video, so if I had to refer back, I certainly could have. I didn't need to. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, the entire sort of idea of this is a little daunting at first because you're like, well, if I can't get this back together, I can't use my gun. And at this point, I mean, I still need to go to the range for some good functional testing, make sure everything works appropriately, that I get the actual action I'm looking for, and everything just works fine. But I don't see any problems. This feels good, looks great. It's nice and clean. So after a few hundred rounds, I'm back in business. And so if you like this content, do me a favor, take a look at my Outer Limitless channel, which is more on the hiking, camping, and backpacking genre. On that channel, I cover all the gear that goes with it. So from backpacks, sleep systems, knives, axes, flashlights, you name it, that's my Outer Limitless YouTube channel. So all right, guys, thanks for stopping by. I hope you like what you saw. I hope you found it a little bit informative. If you like what you saw, please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Take care now. I'll see you soon.